This should be rolling. Should be there. There we go. All right. Hey folks, Les here, back for another week of our content art development seminars. And so, let me just tweak this a little bit. There we go. Set things up so y'all can see my ugly mug on here. Sorry for being a minute or so late. Sometimes I forget my own key commands and had it recording instead of streaming. Go figure. So this week, while I'm speaking, I'm going to go ahead and start this up. This week, we're going to get into a topic that is really... Oh, come back here. Come back here. Hopefully I just fixed that. If that didn't work, then I'm going to kill that the end screen, the inset there. So anyway, this week we're going to get into. Notice I just opened. Gasp. Poser. Oh. So this week we're going to get into a subject that has been something that I've heard a lot about. Man, this is still making me mad. That I have had just tons and tons of questions about for a very long time. And this camera makes me mad. I'm sorry. So we're going to fight with that for just a second. Sorry about that. I was fighting with the stream earlier, and so all of this just kind of went wonky on me. You know, some days things just go sideways. Right. It's a little hard to adjust that with the delay and everything. So hopefully they'll get it. So anyway, now let's get this baby on the road. So here we are back for another of our content artist seminars. This is one of the public ones, so anybody is invited. Hopefully folks are watching and hanging out or whatever and popping into the chat. I hope that also, by the way, while you guys are here, those of you who are in the chat already, please make sure that you like, share, subscribe, all that cool stuff, and toss this out there for other folks. I know we don't operate in a vacuum. I know we all kind of tend to know people and make friends and so on online. So share and let people know, hey, there's something cool going on over here that you're going to pick up some cool tips and tricks on things from. So continuing with our artist development seminars, a public one, as I just mentioned. You guys are here for that. A subject that I have been just inundated with so many times for years is the conversion of content from Poser to Daz Studio. And that's actually a topic that is just enormous, because there's so much that can be done with that. There's so many types of content, and a lot of different types of content have their own little nuances to how you would approach converting them. So what we're going to focus on this week is taking an original figure. Now, I'm kind of known for doing original creatures, original monsters, all that kind of stuff. And what we're going to do this week is take an original Poser creature, and I'm going to show you kind of a run and gun method for taking existing content, especially original figures, from your existing collection of content and migrating it from Poser to Daz Studio very effectively. There are lots of ways that you can do it very quickly. Well, you'll see. There are things you can do that will kind of get you in the ballpark of using the stuff. There's a certain degree of Poser functionality built into Daz Studio, and that's great. But there are things you can do that actually push the quality level forward a great deal, that are just really, really super cool. So before I get into that, I'm going to check the chat, take a look over and see if anyone see who all's here, see if any cool conversations going on, see if folks have any questions about anything. If you guys have anything from the past that you'd like to touch on, or questions, or things you'd like for me to address before we move forward, please post those, and I will snag them as quickly as possible. Also, as is our usual procedure, we have Mr. 3D Loki, Mr. Jason there, hanging out in the chat, and I do believe Terry should be here, the good folks from CGBytes, who make all of this possible and bring these seminars and all the cool content that we're doing, bring this stuff to you guys. So let's take a look over the chat and see what we've got going on. Yeah, the webcam's a little choppy. It's really just there for the sake of, you know, I feel like the communication level is much better, at least when you can kind of sort of see someone's expression. It's one of the things I don't like about talking to people online through text chat and you know, Facebook and all those kind of things. But I feel like a lot of communication gets lost in just typing and text and all that. So even if it's a little bit choppy, which it probably will be for today, I still feel like it kind of communicates a little better than the alternatives. Let's see. All right. I see over in the chat. Oh, and that was Bobby Alpert. See, Miss V is here. We got my good buddy Brent, Mr. Brento, Gray Bro, Brent Bowers. All right, Mr. Brent. So I also want to mention that the figure you're going to see me working on today is the freebie. It's already done, and as soon as a couple little T's get crossed and I's get dotted in the store mechanisms of CGBytes, it will be made available. May even be available for free before this broadcast is even over. So anyway, it's a figure from my own 6S1 catalog that we're going to release as a freebie here via CGBytes for you guys, because I want you guys to be able to actually go back and watch this later, and or if it becomes free and you can grab it during the seminar, that'd be even better. But I want you guys to be able to watch and actually see the figure I'm using and be able to hold that thing, figuratively speaking, figuratively hold it in your hands and work with it in the same way you're going to see me work with it. You'll be able to fumble as I fumble and soar as I soar. So let's see. Oh, I see Susan joined us. Miss Susan Ann Avery. So, oh, and by the way, coffee. Can't do these things without coffee. I'm sorry. It's just this is a prerequisite. You know, I don't ask for bowls of M&Ms, the brown colored M&Ms specifically, because Niles. But coffee, gotta have the coffee. So, furthering my Spinal Tap reference, let's turn this thing up to 11 and get moving. So, before we get into that studio, we're going to take a quick look at the figure in question here inside Poser. Okay. So, here we have this figure called Scorpius. Kind of a nasty monstrosity of mine. Fun stuff. Okay. And just going to tool around on this inside Poser for a moment. So here you see, you know, there's la 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 la, all kinds of stuff in place. Fun guy, fun character. And this is from a few years back. I kind of intentionally chose something that's a little on the older side because I feel like, you know, we all have content that dates back God, now could be as far back as maybe 18, 19 years, maybe more. I don't know. I mean, it goes way, way back. I know I have stuff in my archives that dates back to, like, prehistory. It's got dust on it. It's, the stuff is gonna be there like forever until the hard drives fail. Like if you open the box it's in, your face can come melting off. So, I thought, it'd be kind of cool to address some older content that way and how to migrate that stuff into DAZ Studio. And I like to kind of take a look at things before I go loading it all in. Just make sure I'm familiar with it, familiar with any features and things that I want to make sure that I want to transfer over. One of the big ones, like things with tails, if you have older 6S1 content, you'll find most things are going to have what's called easy pose on them, which is kind of it's not a specific thing unto itself as much as it is a set of standards, just a feature set that I like making sure was built into a lot of things like this, so so that it has certain kinds of remote controls already in place. So let's see. So here we can see this guy, and I just wanted to show him to you inside Poser before we. Hello everyone. How are you? So before we get going, that's right, guys. Before we get going, I'm sorry. Anybody who does this stuff has to do that at least once. Okay, you just do. You just do. Sit there and make the mouths move while you talk. It's kind of I think we all do it. So let's kill this now. I'm just going to minimize this, and I'm going to show you the beginnings of how you would load in a Poser figure into DAZ Studio. I forgive the huge list of libraries you see here. I have a ton. Like, it's stupid the amount of projects that I have on deck at any one time. So, and I don't really see any reason to kick all those out. So what we're going to do, I'm going to minimize where it says DAZ Studio formats, though. We're going to go down to Poser formats. And inside Poser formats, I'm going to go ahead and remove that runtime so that you can see it added. Okay? So let's add a runtime directory by right-clicking on Poser formats. And then we'll just navigate to where we have our runtime, and we'll go inside it and hit select folder. And that will add your figure's runtime in much the same way that it's added inside Poser. Now this kind of builds on the external runtime paradigm that exists in Poser. I use this near religiously. It is extremely rare that I will ever put anything in my core runtime for either Poser or DAZ Studio. I don't like doing that for a lot of reasons. Just the organizational aspect of it alone is kind of a big deal to me, especially when you move as much content around as I do. So just in case that's kind of a confusion, so you know, inside Poser, if you go to Show Library, you can hit All, and you can see all the libraries that you have installed. Then you can drill down and select a specific library, and if you want to add an external library, you click here on Browse for Folder, and you go find that folder, go inside its runtime, and it'll be added just like this. So that's kind of the first analogous process that I wanted to show you is external runtimes, loading those things. I like that for organization, and I like being able to start my thought process between Poser and DAZ Studio by having some parallels, okay? So let's see. Yeah, I'm seeing people saying that that they're having a little bit of problems with the feed, and I understand there's some big thing going on today. Like some guy lost his job, some other dude come in taking his job, and everybody's watching this. I don't know. Last time I lost a job and somebody else took it over, nobody made a big deal about it. That's just me. But apparently it's huge. And it's eating up tons and tons and tons of bandwidth across the internet with live feeds and all that kind of stuff, and causing choppiness and all kinds of craziness. So, you know, it wouldn't be the first time an event like that has thrown a wrench into my world. so, so we're just going to kind of putter on and do our best to muscle through things. You know, that's kind of how that goes. You know, things, that particular job changes, and really, the only thing that really changes is you just got to keep trying to muscle through, and that's what we're going to do here. So, yeah, let's just roll with it. Oh man, yeah. So I'm going to check the chat from time to time, just in case I need to pop in and say something in text speak for a moment. But let's grab a quick sip of coffee and continue, shall we? So, as I was saying, the first sort of parallel between Poser and Dash Studio comes in the form, at least for me, comes in, or at least the one that I want to address first, comes in the form of those external runtimes. So here, you click, and you go add your runtime, whereas over in Dash Studio, you right-click, Poser formats, and add a runtime. Very similar process. And you'll see that they were even kind enough to use some of the same little sorts of icons and things over here with their implementation of the Poser runtime that you would see inside Poser. It's all, they did a really good job of making that very analogous, and I dig that. I think that's nifty. So, from there, where we'll go with things, once we've loaded our runtime in, okay, we'll go to Figures, and here you can see the folder for the figure. And forgive this guy right here. I was playing around with this the other day, and I saved a copy in advance just for myself because I wanted to tinker around. You know, sometimes I like to go through some of this stuff a little bit beforehand, and you know, it's just kind of good to be prepared, kind of have some idea of where you're going to go with things. So I did save one here that I labeled 2016, which is kind of hilarious to me because it wasn't 2016, it was 2017 already. So if we double click this, we're going to see that he loads in, and yay, there's the figure. Okay, well, cool. Is it converted? No. That is not converted. That is DAZ Studio reading the Poser CR2 format. Now, there's a lot that can do, and this may be where a lot of you just want to stop, and that's fine. Because there's a good deal of functionality built in right here where we can go look at things and click on them and have immediate use right there on the spot. And you'll notice too, I did not set limits on this. This is an older figure, and for a lot of reasons, I used to really not like setting limits on figures. On top of all the stuff that I do with this, I also animate quite a bit. And I've always had this feeling that as an animator, I did not like having limits. Because sometimes, for the sake of expression, I would do what animators call break, which is where you break a pose, where you break something beyond normal bounds. And I used to do that a lot. I still do that a lot. And I still, even if you look at a lot of my original figures, you'll see that when I set limits, I tend to set them with a really wide tolerance. I don't like having things locked down too much because, you know, I'm a very expressive person. And I am a comic book guy. I love comics and animation, all this stuff. So I like things that jump and move and have all these big, crazy movements. And part of that is being able to break those movements. So I really don't like having limits on things quite so much. And I used to not have them on at all most of the time. Nowadays, I put them on things because people want it. I get it. You know, they're not comfortable with that. They're not comfortable with that degree of freedom. America. Sorry, it's that day. So I put limits on them. But I still try to leave them as broad as possible. This guy being an older figure, he doesn't have limits on, so you might want to turn those on for some things. And there's a lot of little things like that that kind of vary from person to person. So I don't want to get too out in the weeds with some of the little minutia like that, because there's lots of things like that that I think are matters of personal taste and how you use a figure, and things that can be addressed on on a case by case basis much more effectively than trying to apply a broad stroke to them here. So. Yeah, I'm seeing folks still having problems with the feed, and it might be that there is just too much internet traffic today for our little puny feed to to really be super effective. We'll see. I do. My indicator through YouTube says that I have a green light on stream health, so I know that my upload is good. Just so you guys know. So if you're getting a lot of chop and all that. It's probably not originating here on my side of the YouTube servers, okay? It's probably happening as it hits YouTube, because YouTube has to be getting thrashed right now with traffic. So I just kind of noticed some comments to that regard in the chat, just looking at that. So... Bobby Albert says, to me, it's the old school FMV stutter. Yeah, here we go. Sorry about that, you guys. There's, like I said, a dude lost his job. Some other dude's taking his job, and everybody's watching it. And I'm like, really? We got important stuff like art to do. Yeah, like Jason just said, Loki just said, the stream is recording fine, so the rewatch later will be nice and smooth. Once this whole whatever's going on is over with. So anyway, as I was saying, there's a lot of things, a lot of little things that you could do, and some of it you could do actually in advance inside Poser. Like if you wanted, you could go ahead and preset limits and things inside here. Just inside Poser, you can do that by double clicking and putting your values in and turning force limits on, things like that, and then saving it back out into the library here. And then when you refresh that library over inside Dash Studio, that stuff's going to be reflected that way. I actually don't... I've gotten so used to the workflow inside Dash Studio now that I really don't even bother tweaking that stuff out inside Poser first anymore. Because there's just some workflow improvements that they made inside Dash Studio versus the workflow that we're all used to for years inside Poser that are they're just vastly superior. There's just no other way to put it. I mean, it kind of, it feels a little dirty to me sometimes to say that, because I used to really despise Dash Studio, but they've really knocked it out of the park now. So before we go converting the figure, then we have him loaded in. Let's go ahead and maybe set some of these limits and things. I'm going to show you some tricks for that, which is kind of part of what this is all about today. It's about showing you some little workflow tips and ways to get through a conversion that will make a lot of things much easier to deal with down the line. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to set the limits on these controllers for this guy's pincers. I love that word. I love to exaggerate that word. I'm sorry. My wife and kids have always laughed at me for that. I'm like, pincers. It's just a funny word to me. So if you hold the control key down and you click on a hand, then you can click on another one and add that to your selection. So holding the control key, you can click and select, add to your selection multiple body parts inside Dash Studio. Very, very handy. Then in the parameters tab, now I know a lot of folks will use like shaping or posing or any of these other tabs. I prefer to work from the parameters tab because actually all this other stuff, shaping, posing, all of it is available inside parameters. It's all really the same thing. It's all just data controllers inside the program. The other tabs like posing and shaping and things like that, those are there kind of as organization. They're really there to sort of help you think about them while you're working with them. So, and I tend to do things in a very holistic approach. I look at it from a very broad view. So I like to see all of my sliders, all of my controllers all at once whenever possible. So, cheers. Now, something to keep in mind when you have these multiple body parts selected, if they have parameters on them that share the same names, then they will stack when we do a multiple selection like this. Also, if they have groupings, those groupings will stack. So we can open these up like so, click on a group. So here we have a dial group called morph. And if I hold the control key, yet again, this paradigm carries through a lot of things in the program too. So holding control adds to your selection. So if I hold control and I click on morph down here, you'll see now we have two pincers open close dials made available. So the next thing I want to do is go into edit mode. So you right click and hit edit. And now from here I can, if I move the slider, you'll see it's operating on both of those at once. And I can make certain changes to this, really do a lot of cool changes to a slider from right here. And just as an aside, since we haven't changed the rigging type on this figure yet, it's still functioning. DS right now is actually functioning like a CR2 editor. And so we can make these changes and save them back out to a library through the CR2 exporter, which is kind of a thing that I'll probably cover next week in the exclusive seminar, the seminar that's exclusive to CGBytes brokered artists, because there's some things that are a little more commercial that we'll be going into there that what I'm going to touch on today. But all that to say, you can use this as an editor for CR2. So you could actually mass edit all kinds of parts of the figure right here, and then export it as a CR2, and that'll come back into Poser. So if you wanted to actually make improvements or changes to something, that, it's like in Poser, you have to, like if I wanted to set limits on this, I can't do both at once. I have to do one at a time, double click it, go in, set it, then go do the other one, all that, and then save it all out. Whereas in DAZ Studio, I can come in and hold the control key and click on multiple things and select them. Then we can grab them here, and then let's right click and hit set, hit min-max limits, and let's set these from 0 to 1. Okay. And then we're also going to right click again and go to limits and turn on enable limits on selected properties. So then you'll see that it will clamp the slider into place. And there we have a limit set. And it's on two body parts at once. And we could save that out, like I said, we could save that out in the CR2 format, and that would reopen inside Poser. So, I actually have friends who are also content developers, artists, who content producing artists, who actually prefer using DAZ Studio for developing. Those who do still do Poser content. There are some out there. The number is dwindling, but there are some. And I know some of them who actually still produce Poser content, but do it from inside DAZ Studio. Go figure. So let's see. So I'm taking a look over at the chat right now. It looks like there are just a lot of network problems happening right now. So curious about that. I'm wondering. Yeah, I'm half tempted to actually pause things and come back later, but I think, I know that the rewatch is going to be fine, so I'm going to push through. We're going to work on through this. Russ Barrett says streaming is fine here. He's on Xfinity, he says. So Hmm. Interesting. Yeah, I hate to kind of pause the flow of things for a second, but I do want to keep in mind, when people are having problems, so that if there's something on my end I can do to address it, I want to be sure that I'm there for that. So, uh, Colonel Sanders, I'm a Kentucky boy, so Colonel Sanders says, "I'm across the ocean on another continent. The stream is perfect." Hmm. Interesting. All right, so it's not. Let's see, Miss V says fine with me over in Canada as well. Okay, so it's definitely not everybody. I'm expecting. I don't know how much you guys know about how the internet itself works, but I'm expecting there's probably regions, especially in the United States right now, that are experiencing massive amounts of internet traffic that could just be bogging down some online backbones. So. Um, Nothing we can do about that, but it's not everybody having a problem. So if you guys are having problems, be sure to come back and watch the rewatch a little bit later, okay? So anyway, moving on. We've set limits on our pincers, okay, pincers. And we could go through and do that on other joints, other parameters, things like that, if we wanted. Um, So, for instance, if we wanted to quickly change that so that we had some limits set on, let's say, these forearms, and here I've control clicked both forearms so that I have them selected. And sometimes things don't actually translate over quite right in the naming. You can do all kinds of little stuff with that. So, but just as before, if I click on two objects and then I right click and I can go into set property group. I can change where the dials are. I could go to, oh, this is nice. When you have shared parameters, actually you can get to all the things you can edit about a parameter just by clicking on parameter settings. And if you have multiple objects selected, then this window is actually editing all that stuff for both objects at once, which is pretty nifty. Okay? So, since I am doing this as a conversion, like I'm going to give you guys this raw, unfiltered poser version um, as this week's freebie, and then next week you'll have a nice, clean, commercially viable DAZ Studio version of this made available, something that's much more up to date, all that sort of thing, and some little corrections made, little things tweaked here and there. So. I'm going to go ahead and do some of that forward work here today. And here you can see I'm about to edit 4 body parts at once. Okay. So, and for instance, I'm going to change this where it says side to side. I'm going to change that on these to read front to back. And I need to turn my caps lock off. And I'm going to go ahead and use limits on here, even though I don't have a value set for them yet. And modifier pose. This is important. This guy right here. And one of the things I was interested in about doing this subject that I think is really valuable about it is that in doing a conversion from Poser to DAZ Studio, it reveals a lot of little things about content creation itself, a lot of little eccentricities and features inside DAZ Studio that I think are really cool and really important. One of those is this little guy right here where it says type, okay? This, a lot of times folks will see that through where it says presentation in your, over here when we go to edit a slider. And what that does, it's not just a presentation to you where it guides and it has an effect on how you see a slider in the program. It's how that data is presented to the program. So think of it that way. So for instance, if we were to change this from modifier pose to modifier shape, then the program would see that as a shape modifier. They would see that slider, that data, as being basically a morph. Whereas a morph is not the same thing as a rotation or a translation. Rotations and translations are kind of the backbone of posing. So we want that modifier type set to pose, which it is here by default. But if you were to change that, then it changes how the program sees it. Like if you have something that you want to save out when you save poses, you have to make sure that its modifier type is set to pose. Otherwise, you have to do all kinds of goofy stuff to get it to save out. The reason for that is it actually makes a lot of sense, because you may want to save, let's say, a walk cycle, but not save facial morphs for that walk cycle. Well, by having these different data types labeled that the program recognizes, presentation, presenting those data types to the program, you're able to keep those things separated if you want. It's also interesting too, because sometimes there are things that are morphs, but you may want those to be normally included in poses. For instance, here on this guy, those pincers include morph data. There's rotational data in them, and they also include morph data that corrects little things as they close up. Well, I would want those to be included in poses. So we're going to go into those in a moment and change their data type from modifier shape to modifier pose. Okay? So anyway, back to where we were at the moment. We've changed the name on all 4 of these sliders to front to back. Told it to use limits. We'll hit accept on that now. Now you'll see that it moves those out and down to the bottom. So we have to refresh our listing. And now you'll see we have 4 entries for front to back. Okay? Now the next thing we need to do is actually apply some values. And I'm going to open this back up. And let's just kind of use some generic values for a moment. Let's say -80 and 80. And so now you'll also notice that, just a second ago when I grabbed that slider and moved it, everything just crumbled. Well, the reason for that is once you turn limits on, but you hit huge, you have values in there. When you turn limits on in DAZ Studio, it clamps the slider. Well, if the value is still at the default, like 36,000 or something like that, that comes over from Poser, and you turn that on, then because that value is clamped to such a huge amount, when you go to slide this right here, you're actually sliding across a really large value. So you have to go in and plug in some numbers to kind of bring that tolerance level down so that you're not, sending things doing craziness. So now that we have some basic values in there, now I can slide that and move this around to see kind of where we'd like for it to stop. And also, I only want to do that right now on the collars because I'm going to set some limits on those that are going to be separated. So on the collars, I only want about 30 degrees motion in those. So let's do -30 and 30. Okay. And then if I switch over here in my list, since I still have all the stuff selected, to shoulder, now control click on shoulder. Move those. And let's set those to just some generic values right now of like -65. I know it's actually a little larger than what it probably needs, but like I mentioned earlier, I like to have a pretty wide tolerance in that stuff. So I'm glancing over at the chat. Let's see. Change the modifier. Let's see. Russ Barrett says, when you change the modifier from pose to shape for corrective morphs, does it change anything in how the morphs function? It's a good question. Just wondering if there's a drawback to watch for. No, it does not, actually. Morphs are vertices, period. That's all they are. A morph is just a vertex moved from one point to another, okay? So regardless of what data type it's listed as to the program, it's still just a morph. A morph is always a morph. Morph is a morph, of course, it's just a morph. Whereas a rotation is, that's a rotation. Okay. if I were to take a vertex, if this were a model and I were to take a vertex from here and move it straight to here with no rotation, that's how a morph functions. Whereas a rotation, there's pivot points, and it's going to rotate based around the joint setup inside the rig. This is something a lot of folks don't quite grasp, I think, because they don't really have, well, I mean, honestly, most of the time people don't really have a reason to dig in and understand this about using 3D characters. But there are really two main types of deformation, really three types of deformation in 3D characters. You have global sort of object deformations where, you know, everything that's included in the object. You know, if you grab like the figure node, like if you're using the Genesis figures, and you grab that node that says Genesis 3 female, and you move that, you're moving the whole figure. You're moving the entire rig, you're moving the entire mesh, all of that. That's an object, or excuse me, that's a world level change. Okay, that's a world space sort of change. Then you have the actual character itself, the actual character's mesh, which if you change the shape, the overriding shape of it by moving vertices, that is a deep level of change. That's on a vertex level. That's on a what I would refer to as a sub-object level. Okay? Then you have joints, and those joints are moving things at an object level, but they're moving, the joint itself is moving, and then the mesh is following it, and that is separate from vertex movement. That's why you can have joints move and then have shape kick in with that from a morph and complement it or be used to correct it and things like that. It's kind of a weird set of ideas to think about, but understanding them is really kind of cool. I'm just that kind of guy, though. I like, if there's something I dig, I'm going to want to know everything I can possibly know about it. And that's kind of how I've always been with 3D character animation. So that little bit of insight, though, plays directly into your question, Russ, about you know, will that have an effect on morphs? No, it has no effect, because a morph is always just straight vertex data. Everything moves along a straight vector from point A to point B. There are things we can do inside Dash Studio and Poser and Maya, Max, all the other. There are things we can do inside these that to an end user will look like a morph. It'll show up over here as a dial or a slider that looks like a morph. And a lot of people call them morphs, but they're not. They're not. And I've kind of gone off on this before, talking about how this kind of discrepancy in terminology really creates a lot of difficulty sometimes for me as a developer when I talk to people, because I have to sort of parse out in my head when I converse with people. I have to parse out, okay, they called that a morph. Is that really a morph? Oh, they're having an issue. How do I troubleshoot that? Well, they said it's a morph, but it's not really a morph. Like I've heard people refer to the bend morph or the twist morph. Those aren't morphs. Not morphs. Those are rotations. Okay. Rotations, not morphs. But that's fine. That's fine. The end user doesn't really need to think about that a whole lot. They just want it to work. And so, you know, but for us, if you're watching this, you probably want to develop content, probably have some interest in developing content. A lot of folks who maybe don't have an interest in developing content at first will still play around with things and make art and enjoy using the stuff, and eventually kind of grow into wanting to make their own content. So I feel like getting that kind of thing out there on the table, so you guys have thought about it a little bit as early as possible, can kind of help everybody have a clearer conversation as you guys, you know, start to play in kind of my little sandbox with this. So anyway, it's kind of a long answer to a short question, but it's a question that opens up some things that I like to talk about anytime I get a chance, because I feel like it's kind of an important stumbling block that we run into regularly as content creators. So I'm going to take a quick look back over at the chat, see if there's anything else that I want to address. Let's see. Nice. Yes. Thanks, guys. looks like this figure is now available as the freebie for this week. So you can grab this guy, load him up, warts and all, right there on your screen while we're working. You could actually kind of follow along side by side with me. We're in this together, folks. So let's see. Sweet, 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 sweet. All right. Oh, and Jason, just so you know, I just saw where you posted about next Friday during the vendor-only stream, you get the converted DAS version of the figure. And that freebie, by the way, that will be made available to the public. It's not just for the vendors or brokered artists who attend the private seminar next week. That will be available for everybody. That's kind of, you know, like a little thank you from me for you guys, because this is cool stuff. I enjoy doing this, and you know, so it's kind of like, yeah, let's give him a monster. Let's give him something to chew on here, right? So here we've made some edits to this slider and set some limits, changed its name, done some cool stuff with that. And for the record, okay, now I this is full disclosure. I chose this out of my catalog of stuff because it was a figure that when I was looking around, I was like, you know, I want to find something. I know nobody's perfect. I certainly am far from it, and I wanted to make sure that I gave you guys something. This sounds kind of odd, but I wanted to make sure that the figure you guys got is functional and works great, but maybe has a few little things that you would want to tweak, because I feel like that's a good baseline for everyone to be able to work from and move forward from. So, oh wow, that's really messed up. Actually, we were going back to talking about the streaming problems and all that stuff. I just glanced over, and even though my monitor where I watched, kind of out of the corner of my eye, kind of keep track of our stream health and all that, says it was green, but it was spinning for a second. So, yeah, there's darn those guys in the big job changeovers. So, really, couldn't y'all do that quietly? Let's see. Colonel Sanders asks, are the exclusive videos available for rewatch? Yes, those will be made available as private content via YouTube for CGBytes brokered artists. So, because it's kind of, it's the CGBytes brokered artist. It's kind of our little cool kids club. I know that's kind of crappy in a way. Like we don't want to build niches and everybody should be together and all that stuff. But you know what? There's some really cool stuff that goes on behind the scenes at CGBytes, and you guys want to be a part of that, and this is part of that whole program. So, so yeah, getting the rewatch on those, come on board, bring us some products, bring some stuff on board at CGBytes, and you too can be part of the Cool Kids Club there. So, let's see. All right, so let's get back to working on this figure. Okay. So that kind of takes you through. I'm going to do a quick rundown, maybe edit a couple more values so you see that process. I don't want to go through and do every value on the figure that I would want to change right now, just because we could eat up a little bit of time with that. But I want to make sure that you have the process down, okay? Because that's what this is about. This is about process. So, and I also know that I'm kind of dragging this out a little bit. Like, there's actually some things you can do that would just super fast get this guy up and running, but I'm taking some time to explain some things, because I feel like there's too many times when tutorials out there are here's how you do this, boom, 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 and people go, okay, step A, step B, step C. Why did I do that? So I like giving you the why of things so you understand, because I think when you understand, then you're able to take that and apply it to some of the different situations you find yourself in later, and you just get better. So, and that's what I'm here for, is to help you guys learn and get better. So, Let's go edit a couple more values. I am sure, pretty sure, very confident that the abdomen and chest joints on this guy will need pretty similar limits. So you notice here, before I set any limits on those, I can click and drag on twist, and it doesn't really freak out. That's because, as I was saying earlier, it doesn't have those clamped values. And as soon as you think about it right now it doesn't really care. It's just moving incrementally here. That's great. Even though I just totally janked that up. As soon as I clamp those values, though, if the defaults on it, which we can see right now, are like 360,000, okay? As soon as I clamp those values, then that means from the farthest left to the farthest right on this slider, there's values of 720,000 points of value between those, because that's how that would fall. That's what that would be when it's clamped down to that size. So let's pop in here and just hit use limits, and we'll go ahead and set this to negative 50 and 50 so that we clamp it to something manageable. If we wanted, we could change the name on that. There's really no need to. Our data type is good, okay? So let's hit accept. Now you'll see we have a pretty good limit. I think I'm just going to keep that at that. Negative 50 is a good place for that, okay? And we could go through and do that with our others, bend, twist, side to side, and so on. So that's really how you go through editing a lot of those little features, little aspects of things. We could also do quite a bit on the tail if we wanted, going through locking down some of the easy pose values, some of that stuff. The one place that I think a lot of folks will want to do this, or will want some stuff locked down, is going to be in facial morphs. And here's another little trick that this kind of opens up an opportunity to show you that I really, really dig. So just as with having multiple body parts selected, where you can click on things and select and have multiple parameters, multiple copies of a shared parameter, or parameter that has a shared name, multiple copies that's selected, and edit those. You can also edit multiple parameters at once, which is really, really handy with something like this. So like, I select the head on this character, and we're still in edit mode. I'll click on blink, and now I'm going to scroll. Said I'm going to scroll, thank you, all the way down. This time I'm going to hold shift. If I hold shift and I click at the bottom of that list, it's going to select every parameter down the list. So once I have all of that, then I can right-click on all of them at once. And since I know these are all morphs, like actual, factual, honest-to-God, vertex moving morphs, I'm going to set their values, okay? By right-clicking, I'm going to set min-max limits. We're going to set those to 0 and 1. Most of the time, there might be some where I actually want to go also to -1, but most of the time I want those set from 0 to 1. So let's hit accept, and then let's just try one of them. Okay, let's try the blink. Now, here you can see, we still need to turn the limits on. Let's restore that. Control-E restores it. Let's shift, select all of these, and go to limits, enable limits. Here you can now see how they all clamp down. And there we now have limits in place for all of that. And I'm going to take this as an opportunity to go ahead and save out a copy of this in CR2 format. We're going to export. Now, I don't do this part a lot. I don't export this stuff like this very often because I really don't do much for Poser anymore. Sorry, guys, but I just don't. There's a lot of reasons for it. But here, I'm going to go to File, Export File, Poser CR2. And this already exists, that's fine. I hit yes. Then it's going to ask me some simple little things like what version I want, figure type to base figure. So then here, all of this should be good by default. I'm not going to use a binary morph file for this. And this should all be good. So I hit accept, and now I have a poser compatible CR2 that's been edited from inside here. So now you've got kind of a little extra bonus out of this just in that. So now here comes the big thing, the big thing. Okay, now that all really was just kind of a quick look at how you can actually edit content for Poser inside DAZ Studio, which I think is good to have in context of a figure conversion. Here in just a couple of minutes, it's actually getting time for our mid-seminar break where I go get more coffee, because coffee, yay. We're going to take a short break. Everybody stretch your legs, bathroom, get a snack, get some more coffee. Hopefully watch the line speeds for everybody kind of clear up, everything get cool. And then when I come back, we're going to get into the next big portion of doing a conversion. We're going to go over converting materials to iRay. They're not textures. Textures and materials are two different things, folks, and you're probably going to hear me rant about that when I get back, so be prepared. We're going to be converting it over to iRay, and then we're going to be converting the rigging type, and that's kind of the big, that's like that's the Mongo looming mountain on the horizon of doing a figure conversion, is that data type, or not the data type, but that figure type and the rigging type. So going to go ahead and take a short break, grab some coffee, and when I come back, we'll get into the next phase of our program. Cool. All right, guys. Shall be right back. And I am back. So it's testing and making sure that the thing catches up with me here since I paused. They're still on. Looks like they're still on. Wow, that's so funny. With the lag, I can look over at the other screen and see myself come walking in through the doors there. That's some serious chop on that. Sorry about that, guys. So, looking over at the chat, I see Nick Silver and Mr. Henrico. Henrico. Gotta roll that R. Henrico. Henrico Vizier. I'm probably pronouncing it completely wrong. Please don't take offense. I'm just in a really kind of hyper mood today. Let's see. Enrico, Nick. Hi, guys. So, yo. All right. So, I'm back, and I'm caffeinated. I have coffee, and I know how to use it. All right. Let's roll. So, the next phase of our project is going to be setting up our materials with Iray. Great fun. Actually, dirt simple. Crazy, crazy simple. Okay, cool. So, I have a ton of things docked up here on my screen right now because I changed my interface a little bit recently. And I actually need to clean some of that up. So I'm going to take a moment and do that. Mostly so that you can see things a little more easily. If you hit F3 on your keyboard, you can go into the Customize Daz Studio dialog. And from inside here, you have access to all kinds of nifty, cool stuff. Here we have our toolbars, okay? And if you open this, you'll see that all of this corresponds to the things you see up in the corner or across the top of your screen. And there's some things that I can remove from there. I actually have some stuff added that's causing it to trail off the side of my screen. So I'm going to fix that real quick. Let's see. I don't need this, so we can remove it. And let's see. Don't need this. So let's apply that. And now we should see the rest of my special stuff. That. Cool. So we just clean that up just a little bit right there. And you'll see now there's this section called scripted. So, and that's where I went to, I believe it was, no, it's up here at the top. Custom, yes. Any of these custom commands can be added to your toolbars, and then they'll show up at the top. So I've added, since I use the G3 female and G3 male so frequently, I just added them as scripted items to my interface. And also the Daz Uber shader, the Iray Uber shader that you need for converting your materials over to Iray, I've also added that. It's funny because it was something that was an idea that was given to me some time back by Susan, was to script that up into here, and then I did a little digging. It was like, oh yeah, I could probably toss that in the interface. So now rather than having to go to it up here, which you'll see is analogous to what's over here, I can have a button for it at the top of my screen. So if you don't have that already set up for yourself, the way that you would do that is you would come into where it says Daz Studio Formats. Then we'll go into My Daz 3D Library, drill down to, where did you go? Shader presets, there you are. Then inside Iray, go to Daz Uber. You can right click this and hit Create Custom Action. And when you create a custom action, it will place a copy of this in this menu. And then from the dialog that I was just showing you, that big interface where you can customize everything, then from there you can add this stuff to your main interface for the program. So you'd have this available right here all the time and not always have to drill down to it or even go up into a menu here. Pretty handy. So I want to go ahead and also turn on or use a render preset that I have. I have a number of render presets that I've made using free HDRIs that are available online. At some point, when God decides to grace me with 36 hours in the day, so that I can, work a 24-hour day instead of the 16 I normally do. At some point, I'm going to probably compile these together with links because they're other people's HDRs, so I can't just go grab them and redistribute them myself. But they are free for you guys to go download. So at some point, I'm going to compile these all together with links so that you can grab the HDRs and then have these same presets because they're pretty cool. I use these presets. All of these, by the way, they're free for commercial use, like commercial rendering. I think I probably could redistribute them, but I don't want to chance that. It's just it's not cool. So anyway, I have all these presets that I've made. There's one in particular here, though, that does not use an HDR image, but instead is kind of my own nifty little tweaked out version of some of the settings and parameters that are available already inside DS. I've just tweaked them out to create an infinite white room, and I love using this white room to test materials and just to look at things. It's actually a good thing too. Sometimes for certain types of products, it just makes for really cool looking renders, and it's a nifty little preset. It actually doesn't use an HDRI at all, and so there's a good chance that we can make that available to you guys as well. But in the meantime, okay, I have this nice neutral white infinite room preset that I'm going to use. You can use whatever preset you like, whatever works for your eyes in judging textures and materials and all that. Grab that and use it. And if you don't have one, you may have to take a moment to set up some render settings. So once I've applied that, then I'm going to go up here to my this little guy right here that tells us what draw mode we're in. I'm going to go to NVIDIA iRay, and we're going to give that a moment for it to cook. Okay, it didn't even take it that long. It's pretty cool. That makes me happy. So, and this is a very bright environment, but that's because I want to see at what point my colors are going to wash out, all kinds of stuff like that. Okay. That's over the chat. That's right. That's right. Russ says everyone behave. Teacher's back. That's right. You kids behave yourselves, you little rascals. That's great fun. All right. So converting your materials over to iRay, and I'm going to take a moment to talk about this in just a second. As I said, prepare for rant mode. Materials and textures are not the same thing. Don't make me go into my Shatner voice again. Are not the same thing. New. Totally different. A material or shader, those two terms are synonymous. Material or shader can contain textures, but it doesn't have to. A texture will never contain a material because a texture is an image map, period. All it is. That's why, really, most of the time, when I'm talking with other pros, we'll say textures, but you'll hear people say texture map. They'll put the word map at the end. They'll say normal map, displacement map, texture map. So I think sometimes maybe people say texture and they mean material. They really should say texture map. It's much more clear. But every time I say material, I am talking about the set of algorithms and settings that contain your textures, contain any other elements that define how the surface interacts with the render engine. That's extremely important because when talking about this stuff, those terminology matters. Mixed up terminology creates communication problems. And oh my God, if you go into doing anything collaborative with someone else, if you step up into becoming a brokered artist and you want to do collaborations with other people, if you have shared terminology, the work is so much easier. So much easier. If you step even further from that and go into a production environment, like we have here on a pretty regular basis, where you are working with other studios or you're working on projects for clientele, which we do outside of this. We also do stuff for gaming and film, things like that. Trust me, you step into those realms, that terminology can kill you, can just drive you right into the ground on a project. So I highly encourage people to try and adopt sound terminology. It also affects how you think of things, because if you think of a material as a texture and then you see something on screen that doesn't look right and you're thinking, oh, there's something wrong with my texture. Is there? Is it really your texture, or is it really your material? Is it really your texture map, which really should be called diffuse map? Or is it your normal map, or your displacement map, or your specular map, or your scattering map, or your heat map, or so on and so forth? There's a lot of little things to pick up on there with terminology, and just consider the way that affects how you think about what you're looking at, because it does make a difference. The better grasp you get on that, I think the clearer your thinking and clearer your problem solving becomes. Problem solving is what we're doing here. All of this, from the very first concept all the way to the end, is problem solving. The moment I sketch out a creature like this, I'm problem solving. My first problem is, what kind of creature am I going to make? Oh, then I solve that problem by drawing it or coming up with an idea for it from somewhere. Then my next problem becomes, how do I make that? So everything that we do is a set of problems to be solved. And if your terminology isn't sound, then that affects how you think, which in turn affects how efficiently you can address those problems you're going to solve. So I know I'm kind of getting off in the weeds a bit there with some conceptual sort of stuff, but I feel like that kind of thing doesn't get talked about enough. And when I work with other artists, I run into this all the time. And it just makes my soul ache every time I run into artists and I want to work with them, I admire their work or whatever, and we start having communications breakdowns because the terminology, has led to kind of inefficient or some incorrect thinking on one concept or another. And that's not to slam anybody. It's just, if no one's ever pitched that to you that way and you've never taken the time to think about the effect the terminology has on how you conceptualize the problems you're trying to solve, then if no one's ever brought that up and that idea has never dawned on you, then you have no reason to consider it. It's not a thing. But if you give that some thought and you kind of say, okay, I'm going to make sure I use the right terms, and I'm going to teach myself to think of these things with right terminology, and I'm going to move through this with some of this stuff kind of correct, then your head is going to be on straight when you run into problems in one area or another. So anyway, all that aside, let's get back into converting our shaders over for Iray, our materials. Let's take a quick look at the chat. Oh, cool. Yeah, everyone's really quiet. So wow, that's how I know I'm on a real tear, is when the chat just kind of goes silent. That's like, oh crap, man, I really probably just went off, didn't I? So all that to say, we're going to convert this thing over for Iray now. And really, all we need to do is go to our Surfaces tab. And I'm going to do all of its materials at once. Now, this come over from Poser with nice materials already set up on it. Yay. Very handy. And by default, we have the 3D light. That name has always amused the crap out of me, sorry. 3D light? I feel like it should be singing Groove is in the Heart or something. It always makes me chuckle to say 3D light. I'm sorry. We have that is the material setup. The shader by default is for that render engine. So if we just click on the figure name in our surfaces, or we can shift click across all the surfaces and have them all selected, then we can either go up here to scripts where I have this saved, or you can go over here and drill down through shaders, go to the DAZ Iray Uber, or as I've done now, I have this here in my interface, and I can just click on that and it will apply all of that. Okay, it will apply this change to these shaders. So now we have the Iray Uber shader in place. Now you'll notice it doesn't really look that different, and it's not going to. The reason is when you go into Iray, Iray looks at the 3D light, moves in render, looks at the 3D light shader and uses the Iray Uber shader as kind of, I think that the way DAZ has set this up, I should say, because that's not actually an Iray thing. Iray is actually a standalone thing from NVIDIA. The way DAZ has set this up to translate from 3D light to Iray on the fly, it basically looks at, this is my understanding, and if I'm wrong, somebody correct me. I don't want to be wrong on something and not get corrected. So, but from my vantage point, what it looks like, let's say it that way, what it looks like is going on is DAZ Studio is doing an on-the-fly conversion of 3D light to Iray, and they've got some approximations in place so that it should look about the same. The reason you want to change it over to Iray, though, is so that you get access to all the little granular controls, bells and whistles that Iray has to offer through the Iray Uber shader. The Iray Uber shader is kind of a DAZ-specific thing, by the way, that is really pretty neat. Maybe sometime we'll do a whole session where we crack open the editor in here and look at the crazy network that they put together for that. I've done plenty of shader editing in my day, and what they did on that thing is nuts. It's pretty crazy cool. So let's see. Henrico says, glad I came in the nick of time. Don't know much about the Iray shader. You know, I hope that I can at least show you some stuff that will be helpful in your workflow. I'm not going to get super granular into Iray today because Iray in and of itself, Iray is a massive, massive thing. It is a render engine on par with and very similar to Mental Ray, which if you watch any like VFX breakdowns from ILM or Weta or any of the big dog studios out there, we're not a big dog studio. We're kind of a Chihuahua-sized studio. Really more of a Chihuahua puppy-sized studio. We're tiny, itty-bitty. Too small to small enough that we don't come on the radar of any of the evil empires out there. But but Mental Ray, if we're doing professional work in film and broadcast, odds are we're going to be rendering with Mental Ray. Well, Mental Ray and Iray are extremely similar, and so I'm not going to go super deep into Iray, into the guts of it, because we could, and there's a lot of cool stuff that you can do there. That's a whole other subject for itself. But I am going to touch on just some surface stuff enough that should apply to most uses inside DAZ Studio, or at least a lot, okay? And definitely in the context of a character conversion. So, let's see. Oh, God. And now Russ is quoting Groove is in the Heart. Thanks, guys. He says, thanks, Les. I'll never see 3D light and not hear that song now. You're welcome. So, here we have already converted now from 3D light to the Iray Uber shader. And we can see it here in our nice neutral environment. Let's just kill this stuff on the side so we have a larger view. and coffee. So the next thing that we want to do is start editing this shader. And there's a little trick that I like using quite a bit. There's a tool that is the surface selection tool up here. It looks like little cards, like you're playing a card game. So if we click that tool and then we right click on our figure, you get this nifty little selection dialog. So here I'm going to drill down here where it says select Scorpius surface using diffuse color map Scorpius C1.jpg, because that's what's on there. And you'll see that when I do that, it'll select the materials that use that texture. Okay? So I like to use that. In this guy's instance, that texture is only used on one particular material. Although I do think it should be used on the mouth. So I'm going to right click, hit copy selected surface, and I'm going to apply that to the mouth. Can't remember why that wouldn't have been, but there it was. So now that we have that on two different surfaces, let's use this again. You'll see now we're going to take the surface selector and right click, and now you'll see that when I hit that, we're selecting both of those materials at once. It's going to select all the materials that have that map associated with it. Whenever you see me go off to the side, that's because I'm checking the chat, by the way. Okay. So now that we have all of these the materials selected that use that map, we're going to start making some little changes. You can do all kinds of cool stuff with this. I'm going to start by turning my glossy reflectivity down to nothing, because I don't want reflections off this surface. Then I'm going to turn my glossy roughness. I'm going to keep that relatively low. And if we bring up the glossy layer weight, glossy is kind of analogous to specularity. If you're an old poser user, specularity is kind of what we use there. Glossy is it's not the same thing, but for a lot of uses, you can think of it that way. So if you're familiar with some kind of old school non-physics based rendering terms, think of glossy as being a lot like specularity. So then let's scroll on down. Not going to touch any of this. Now, this guy is an older figure which did not have normal maps. I believe this figure is pre-normal mapping, which kind of boggles my mind. It's actually not pre-normal mapping. It didn't come out before the existence of normal mapping. It just came out before we had normal mapping available to Poser and that studio. So, which really sucked, to be honest. I really hated that we didn't have that. I kind of cried myself to sleep a few nights going, please God, why won't they give us normal mapping? So we eventually got it. Yeah. But this was before we had that. So it used a grayscale bump map. And this actually may even be before I used Zbrush on a regular basis for a lot of my texture work too, because this looks like some of the kind of texturing. There's like a look that comes out of some of the older tools I used to use, particularly inside Maya. Neither here nor there. I'm just kind of amused in the moment by that. So here we have base bump. We can turn that up because it already has that in there, and you will get some bump in the surface. But I want to update this to normal mapping. Okay, so let's just. Here's a little trick that I like to use for navigating to maps. Navigating your computer, as stupid basic as that may seem in some ways, I've got little jumpy, weird, twitchy kind of ways that I navigate stuff that lets me get places super fast. So, like the way that I'll edit to create a normal map for this is I'll hit Browse, right? And then I'll right-click. That way DS is going to open my Explorer window, to the folder where that texture is, and then I'll right-click that image, and then I have Photoshop already associated with it. So I'm going to go ahead and bring open Photoshop. And yes, I know I'm using an older version of Photoshop for the vast majority of my uses. The newer versions don't really have all that much stuff that actually matters, so I just don't bother. So now we have this bump map, this grayscale bump map open. And I'm going to go to Filter, and I like using X Normal. You could use the NVIDIA normal map filter. That's a free download. But so is X Normal, and I prefer X Normal on a lot of levels for a lot of reasons. I don't want to get off into a lot of that right now, but X Normal, I feel, creates superior can't speak, normal maps from grayscale images in ways that the NVIDIA tools just don't quite have. So I'm going to click on X Normal in my filters, and we're going to go to height to normals. And that may seem a little counterintuitive, like why is it height? Well, a grayscale map in 3D is typically considered a height map. Used to be called a bump map. It's also a displacement map most of the time. So we're going to hit height to normals. Brings this up. Leave everything here at the default. Okay. And hit continue. And there you can see what it has generated from that. Is not bad. Not bad. If we wanted, we could actually tweak this and kind of enhance the effect of the normal map by using brightness and contrast on it, but I think I'm good with this. So from there, I would just save this, and you can see here I already have saved this out once already, so that was just for the sake of demonstration. So I'm going to select that now. You see, since we just opened the bump map, the grayscale map in Photoshop, converted and saved it, then our normal map would be sitting right there next to it. And our dialog is still open, so then I can just go in that. There we have it. So now that we have our normal map brought in, actually, oh, pardon me, I accidentally put that in base bump. So actually, we could have done that. But so now let's go to the normal map channel right below it, and now we'll have our normal map brought in. And really, in this kind of garish lighting, you're not even going to see that much of a change. So sometimes you might want to tweak some of that stuff out a little bit. I'm going to go over into my render settings to tone mapping, and let's dim that down just a little bit. And if you push up burn highlights and crush blacks, you'll get a much higher contrast on your image, which I kind of like that sort of thing. And if the white background, which right now that white background is actually kind of messing with me a little bit, so I'm going to give it something kind of complementary. I don't want to let myself get too distracted with playing around with that, so let's not even worry about that. Let me go ahead and change out to something that's a little more indicative of a common use. Let's grab this guy. If you look at a lot of my recent products at CGBytes, you'll see there's a series of creatures I just released that I used this setting in those, and this is a pretty good one. So also in my render settings, I want to turn off use headlamp, because that headlamp will totally lie to you. It's just the dirtiest little liar when it comes to your shaders. It will totally ruin how your shaders show up, and you won't be able to get a good idea of how your editing is actually going. You're not going to have a good idea of how the lighting is interacting with the material. So you want to make sure that in your render settings you have this guy, this auto headlamp, kill it with fire. So now we can see really the results, the effective results of converting that over to Iray from 3D Light. And then from there, we can start to play with things a lot. And there's a lot of cool stuff that we can do. And I'll show you just a few quick tricks for making some adjustments and just playing with materials. You can get a lot of different looks out of something like this just with messing with the materials. And this is kind of one of the fun parts of converting a figure from Poser to Daz Studios, because you're opening yourself up to Iray and a lot of stuff you can do with that. So let's go back in here and look at our material a little bit. And let's turn on some top coat, push that up a little over half, and then let's turn up the roughness on that, turn the reflectivity up a bit, and then let's set our top coat bump mode to normal map, and then choose our normal map from that drop down. And just so you know, just in full disclosure, where this is an older figure, this Poser version of it, the constraints were different on a lot of things back then, and requirements were different on a lot of things back then. My own requirements on a lot of things have changed over the years. So it's funny because as I work on this, I'm like, oh God, am I really giving them that? Oh, there are little things I see that bug me. That stuff will all be a little different in the Daz Studio version that comes out next, that you'll be getting next week. You're going to see different UVs, textures updated a little bit. There's a lot of stuff that's kind of, like when I talk about how the brokered artist exclusive seminar next week is going to go into finishing out a conversion. Okay, it's not so much that it's not finished. This is a usable conversion, but it's that I'm going to show you how to take your old content. You're going to be able to build from what we've done this week, and then go the rest of the way. Like I'm going to talk a little bit about differences in UVs from, say, a few years ago to what you might want to do now. Differences in textural considerations, different types of maps to include, lots of under the hood rigging stuff. There's a lot of things. Next week is going to be very packed, solid for you brokered artist folks. So, and this week is kind of the run up to that. This is the stuff that kind of any user can take this and use it to convert on the fly their content so that they can use it, their existing collection. But next week, you guys want to be here because it's going to be going into some, okay, now this is how we polish this, push it the rest of the way, and really make this, a commercial product. So anyway, that said, I just kind of got off on that side because I saw some things and I'm like, oh God, why am I, oh wait, no, this is why I chose that. I chose it because I know this has some blemishes. That's okay. The Daz Studio version, get rid of those. So once I've plugged in my normal map into my top coat, I'm going to turn up that top coat bump. And then I also want to bring down that base color from being quite so pure white. I actually want to give that a little bit of gray, kind of dull that back down a little bit, because the highlights in the textures can be a little garish. So let's take a look at this, a little less of that base bump on it. Okay. So I know that may not seem like a whole lot, and it really it's one of the reasons that kind of like when people are like, "Oh, is it iRay compatible?" That has I see that a lot. I hear that a lot, and I'm like, really? Is it iRay? Everything's iRay compatible. There's really not. There's nothing that makes anything not iRay compatible. Something that just dropped right into the program that still is using the default 3D Light shader is iRay compatible. It's working in iRay, and you can do stuff with it. And you can just drop that iRay Uber shader on something. Boom. It then is converted to the iRay shader system. And then from inside there, you can tweak stuff all you want. I prefer to say iRay optimized because any of this stuff can work in iRay. So, again, it's something that, I don't know, little things like that get to me sometimes. Nick says those pincers remind me of the plant in Little Shop of Horrors. That plant's name is Seymour. Thank you. He says, feed me. I don't think my headlamp is on. Terry asked if my headlamp is on. No, my headlamp is not on. All of the lighting generated in that scene is being generated by the HDRI image that is plugged into my environment settings. Okay. And I have my scene opened up to the full viewport, which kind of causes this to skew a little bit because of the way I have my stuff set up. So if I were to, let's just pick a different format. There's a number of things we could get into there with rendering. I don't want to bog this down too much with that. Maybe bog this down just a little bit with that because it's actually starting to bother me now that I'm looking at it. So, let's change that to 3. Interesting. That's interesting that that's not working for me today. Sometimes you just get bugs in the system. Anyway, that's not the focus here, so I'm gonna get back to focusing on this character a little bit more. So, just looking through some more little tweaks and things on my materials. Is there anything else I want to do? I think I'm pretty good for now with this. I'm feeling good about it. So that kind of brings us through the actual iRay conversion, as it were. Hallelujah, you've been converted. So the next thing that we want to do, and I'm going to turn iRay off for this because iRay is a little laggy in interaction. The next thing that we want to do is converting the rigging type. And this is really kind of where you get into aspects of a figure conversion that are much more meaningful, in my opinion. Because while it works fine with the, just reading the CR2, and this may be all you want. If you're just going to convert existing content for use in renders, for your own personal use, this may be all you really want to do with it. I personally, though, I like being able to turn up subdivisions on the mesh, which Daz's implementation in CR2 format, I don't think can do, although we can try. If I go to figure, geometry, convert to sub-D, it might have worked. Okay, yeah, so we can also convert to subdivisions without having to change our format. That's kind of cool. So that's actually pretty nifty stuff there. If we go to a wire view, let's see if we have, there we go. few sub-Ds, and we should be, I just cranked that up 2 sub-Ds, so you probably can't hardly see those sub-D polys in the viewport. But let's go to wire shaded. Maybe now you can see them. I zoom in really, really close. See those sub-polys there. So if we bring down that resolution, you'll see there's the original topology. There it is subdivided. Vast. So there now we've pushed that, we've converted that. Now the geometry is subdivision capable. Yeah, it doesn't. I just glanced over in the chat. Nick said, "I'm not sure it saves that in the CR2." No, it does not. That I can guarantee you. So at that point, you would need to save it in a DAZ Studio format. So that kind of brings us to the next big thing. Like I said, is rigging. So we're going to change this from this parametric old school poser rigging by going to edit figure rigging and convert figure to weight mapping. Then that's going to bring up this little guy where we can choose triax or general. So let me get a drink quick. So what's the difference between triax and general weight mapping? That is a topic we could spend days on. I'm going to try to cover it in as encapsulated form as I can. Poser's parametric rigging breaks down all 3 axes of 3D space. Local 3D space. So like if you looked at the joints, you'd see that you'd have a rotation going this way, one this way, and one this way. Poser breaks that down and has spheres or capsules. Now there's for a little while there's been skin weights inside Poser, but the parametric map rigging has still been there, and really a lot of the older content folks have going to have that parametric rigging in it. A lot of newer content is still going to have parametric rigging because if you're using Poser, there's some good reasons to use that parametric rigging, but I'm not going to get into that. That's why I said we could talk about that in some great depth, the differences between all this stuff, minutiae about it. But suffice that to say, inside Poser, each axis has its own set of deformers, basically, its own set of little controllers that wrap around an area of the model and define how that area of the model is weighted to a given joint, a given rotation area. So when you convert this inside DAZ Studio, you have this choice between triax and general. And triax is, they're actually really similar, okay? To better explain what these are, you kind of have to know what the Poser parametric rigging is, which if I pop over to Poser and we open the joint editor inside there, this is just so you have kind of some comparisons, okay? Here you'll see, let's grab a joint right here, and you'll see that you have these different parameter sets, different controllers, different deformers for each of the different axes of rotation. So that's what rigging looks like, old school rigging, especially parametric rigging, looks like inside Poser. So in DAZ Studio, though, we're going to convert that forward, because DAZ Studio doesn't even really have it open hardly for you to edit that type of rigging. And we're going to convert that forward to the newer types of rigging in DAZ Studio that are all based on skin weights. So the difference between the two, if we look at Poser's parametric rigging, we have these volumes that encapsulate parts of the mesh, and those define a fall-off area of influence. So then if I were to bend this body part, you'll see that anything outside the red is not deformed, and anything inside the green is completely deformed, and everything between the two gets a gradient value of influence. Okay, that's kind of a nutshell explanation of what parametric rigging inside Poser is. If we're in DAZ Studio, we're going to convert that to skin weights. Now, skin weights are totally different in that skin weights, instead of having a volume that goes around the mesh, skin weights actually have value per vertex. So every vertex then has a value of influence associated with it that links it to a given joint. And one of the really cool things about that type of rigging, and especially the way it's implemented in DAZ Studio, which is extremely similar, almost identical to how it's implemented in Maya, 3D Studio Max, Cinema 4D, Lightwave, right on down the line. All the big dog programs use this the same damn way. So, and I'm not entirely sure that Poser's implementation of skin weights necessarily adopt those same paradigms yet. But I know that in DAZ Studio they do. In DAZ Studio it is the same. But a skin weight is when you have vertices, each have their own individual set of values that attribute to a given bone. Yeah, see, Limba Zero in the chat says weight map is also in Poser 11. Yeah, the weight mapping, that's what I was saying, is there is weight mapping. I've used Poser 11. I've beta tested it. But the weight mapping implementation inside Poser is a little different. There's some things there that I'm going to get to. The weight. Let me reverse that, or kind of explain for a second. The weight mapping implementation in Poser is basically triax weight mapping, which I was about to explain the difference. But before you really can understand triax, I feel like you need to kind of understand just what weight mapping is, and some folks might not know. Weight mapping is, like I was starting to say, is when you have a weight, a value applied to a given vertex that links it to a bone. And if you have multiple bones, then you have multiple values, and each of those define how much influence those bones have over that vertex. So, a vertex can have zero influence over it from anything, or it can have 100% influence from something, and then everything that's going to push and pull at that vertex all shares in that. So you have from 0 to 100, and that is shared across different joints. So, and that's general weight mapping. That's the most common kind of weight mapping you find in most high-end 3D programs, and that's how general weight mapping works inside DAZ Studio. And you'll notice nowhere in that description did I mention the different rotation axes. That's because triax weight mapping, which is basically the weight mapping inside Poser, triax weight mapping is kind of a hybrid between general weight mapping and parametric rigging. So with triax, what you have is you have skin weights per vertex, but the weights are also, they're per vertex, per rotation. So with triax, like if I go over to Poser and I were to convert this to a weight map, okay, here we now have converted that to a weight map. So it took the numerical values that those parametric deformers had over all those vertices and just baked those numerical values into each vertex. But it only did it for that rotation. It did not do it for each of these. Okay? And I know there is the ability to use a single weight map for a whole figure inside Poser, but there's a pile of functionality that it does not have. I kind of have complained about that to people. You know who you are. I've kind of complained about that for a while. It's like, your implementation of this is not right. Sorry, it's just not. I hate to say it, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but it's not. The general weight mapping is not right. The triax weight mapping inside Poser is great. That's fine. But that's also kind of a non-standard form of weight mapping, and there's a whole pile of reasons that I'm not real fond of it. It's cool, it can do cool things. It's actually really powerful and really granular the way you can rig with it, but I'm not, you know, there's a lot of reasons I don't really care for it that much. So anyway, but that kind of gives you a comparison, so that maybe you'll have an understanding, like, you know, there's parametric, and then this is basically triax is kind of what Poser's best skin weight implementation is triax. There's kind of its own brand of triax. So when we convert a figure, I like to always go with general weight mapping. And what general weight mapping is going to do, it's basically going to go from parametric momentarily into triax. I think they're probably doing this way. I don't know. I'm not one of the engineers behind it, so I can't say for sure. But my guess is it's going to take the values that were present in the original parametric rigging. It's going to look at those values for each vertex across all three axes. It's going to convert those, then bake those into weights for each axis, and then take an average of each of those and have a final value pulled from that average that creates a single map. So I kind of wrote some specs on that a few years ago for some people. That's kind of a thing. That's one way that you can convert from these different data types, kind of behind the scenes. That's going to get into some nuts and bolts stuff that is like, ooba-jooby. All that to say, when you're converting a figure, start off in that CR2 format, and we go to the edit menu. We're going to go down to rigging and hit convert figure to weight mapping, and we have a choice between triax and general weight mapping. Now, that kind of lengthy description I just gave about the differences between those, the reason I give that is because I feel like if you understand some of the nuts and bolts, you don't have to get as crazy deep into it as we do here sometimes. But if you understand, at least in theory, some of that, then you'll be able to make your choice a little more informed. And when you make that choice, you'll kind of know what you're getting into. You'll know why you want to choose that. 9 times out of 10, I choose general weight mapping. It's easier to work with because you don't have to edit a map 3 times for every joint. You can get, I believe, just as high a quality results out of it. Plus, it already reminds me of what I'm used to using out of Maya, Max, and all the big dog programs. So I'm much more apt to use general weight mapping. So I'm going to go ahead and click on that and hit accept. And we'll give that just a moment. And now it's converted to general weight mapping. Now, the downside to that conversion is because it's not keeping values. It's doing an average of values from all 3 of those rotations. You're going to have some weight editing, some weight map editing that you have to do after the fact, which you probably would want to do anyway, because with general weight mapping, you can vastly improve on the type of deformation you have in your rig. Your rigging just look better. So why not try to get that out of it? You know, why not give yourself some improvement when you're doing this? So I'm going to glance over the chat for a second. Brent says Triax sounds like a laundry detergent brand name. Yeah. Triax and 3D Light. There's a joke in there somewhere, but I'm not on it enough today to make that. Brent, Russ says I've tried washing clothes with Triax. Don't recommend it. Yeah. Boy, we have fun. We have fun here. All right. So now that we've converted from our CR2 format over to the general weight mapping format, I'm going to go in and look at, I'm going to pick a joint that I know is a problem area because we're starting to run short on time, and I don't want to go over today too hard. I can tell you, though, going in, probably the first joint that I would edit is going to be the eyes. And the reason for that is most of the time there's some internal CR2 editing that we've done that strips out the parametric joint editing or joint parametric rigging from eyes in Poser. It's weird. There's a bunch of weird internal text edited stuff that we do. that is what allows them to move without influencing the mesh around them. So, but because of that, when you do a conversion, eyes normally don't even end up getting converted quite right. So that's something to keep in mind. Like if I click on this eye right now and I go to move it, you're going to see the bounding box moves. It's because the joint itself is moving, but that eye isn't doing anything. So if it's your first time doing a conversion, you might see that and go, oh my God, what is going on here? So what I'm going to do then is I'm going to open up my tool settings. I'm going to go into my group editor. And I do love that when you convert a figure, this is one of the things I do like about doing conversions and why sometimes if I'm doing an original figure now, even if I only intended to ever go into Dash Studio, I still might do some of my work ahead of time inside Poser. Maybe not so much anymore, but for a while there I did that, and I still do sometimes. And one of the reasons is I like that how when we do this conversion, we get all our groups intact from Poser. And those groups allow us to make selections really fast, really easily. So inside Tool Settings, in our Geometry Editor, if I go to LI, left eye, and I hit the plus sign, it's going to select the mesh for that group. Then, from there, I can go into my skin weight, or my node weight map brush, click on General Weights, then right-click and go to Weight Editing and hit Fill Selected, and now we have that 100% weighted to the joint. And probably behind me, you can see in the kitchen there, my son Killian, who works with me, is starting to rummage through the refrigerator. It's kind of funny. I don't know how well you can see through those glass doors, but it amuses me sometimes. So here we have the eyeball weighted fully to the joint, and now you'll want to set limits and things on it. You might want to tweak some stuff here and there. But then I'm going to go into the right eye, which I can right-click and select the right eye. And I'll brush over a few polygons. That way it kicks out that other stuff selected. Or I could just right-click and go to Geometry Selection and hit Clear Selection. But I like to just brush over a few polys because then it'll gray out the plus sign for them, for that group they're associated with. And it kind of gives me a way of highlighting that group in the Geometry Editor so I can quickly drill down and find it. And then I'll hit the plus sign and grab all of the polys for the eyeball. Now we'll switch back to the Node Weight Map brush. Click on General Weights, right-click, Weight Editing, Fill Selected, Accept. And now we have corrected our eyes. So now that is working properly. Okay. So that's the first joint that I would edit almost always, is going to be the eyes or anything that I know has the internal parametric rigging composer ripped out of it so that it would move without influencing other parts. Anything that is set up that way, sometimes mechanical figures, robots, stuff like that, will be set up that way with certain parts. I know I've done that plenty of times myself. So if you know something has that and you're going to do a figure conversion, that's something you want to keep in mind. So from there, I'm going to show you a little bit about editing skin weights on problem joint areas. And that is really, after that, we're going to save the figure out in a format where you can load this converted version in. And so then if you followed along, you'll have a basic conversion of the figure from what we gave it away for free today. I'm going to show you how to tweak those joints out now with the skin weight maps. And then next week, there'll be a whole lot more polish and things added to it. So that's going to be pretty cool. Let's go ahead and jump in now. The first problem area I almost always go to is the collar. Okay, so, and I mean, if you started out with some decent parametric rigging from Poser, it probably won't be too bad. You may not even want to touch it, but I still like to go through and look, and I tweak things all the time. So I'm going to go into my node weight map brush. I'm going to set the outer radiance to anywhere from 60 to 80. I'm going to go large with it and go to 80. And my inner radius anywhere from 30 to 50. So I'm going to go low with that. And then just going to move that joint a little bit. And if I still have some mesh selected, which is why I didn't do anything when I clicked on that. Whenever you have a respect selection turned on in the node weight map brush, that means that any polygons that are selected are what the brush will be active on. And any polys that aren't selected will not be affected. So I like keeping that on most of the time. So just before we get further into that, then we need to make sure we have mesh selected that we're going to edit the weights on. So I'll brush over a few polys, and that's going to show me, see how it grays it out right there. So now, okay, there's my left collar, so I can hit the plus sign and grab that. And then from there, I'll hold the control key and hit plus on my number pad a few times and spread that out. That just expands our selection. Now I'll go back to my node weight map brush, and I can hold the control key down and paint over the mesh, and that will spread and smooth those weights. And here you can see where it gets where it was a little creased around the back. Another thing that we could do is right click and go to weight editing and hit smooth selected. And I'm just going to leave in the values that I have in by default right now. And there you can see how it smooths that out, makes for a much more subtle effect from the joint. Okay. Then the next joint that I would edit would be the shoulder downstream from the collar. And I'm going to expand that selection a little bit further. And again, I'm going to right click and go to weight editing, smooth selected, hit accept. Give that just a moment. So now when I move that forward, we get a smoother deformation. Now, I have a tendency to want to paint skin weights that are going to kind of flow with muscle movement. So since this was built parametrically, it's going to have a different sort of movement to it. And I want to make sure that I edit that a little bit. So I'm going to set my value kind of low on my brush and just gently go over the area just a little bit here, because I know that when I move a shoulder, you can't see it here, but if I move my arm, okay, if you put your hand right here and you move your arm forward, then you can feel your pectoral muscle moving with that. So I try to do that. I do that kind of thing a lot when I'm rigging creatures, is I will move whatever my analogous body part is to what I'm working on theirs. And I will look at, I'll take my hand and feel it and go, okay, where is that moving? How should that be affecting the figure? And then I'll try to emulate that in the way I paint my maps. So now, to see how now we get that little secondary movement in there. And then we can just come around that and smooth that out a tiny bit. So that's kind of a big consideration for me in how I rig things, just any time how I rig things, and especially in converting an existing creature. So that gives you, a good look at all the really those are the, I shouldn't say it's all, but those are all of the really functional parts of converting a figure from Poser to DAZ Studio format, at least for the sake of personal use. There are lots of things to consider if you're a content artist and you have stuff that you want to convert that's out of an existing catalog. You want to update it from Poser to DAZ Studio. There's a lot of stuff you really need to consider, some crazy stuff, actually. There's some pretty big subjects there that will make it a commercially viable product. There's actually some things, and I'll give you a quick look at one of those, just as a for instance, is morphs. Okay, here we click on the head and we have all these morphs here, but you notice that if we're in edit mode, it says A next to them. Well, the reason it says A is those are aliases. Because in DAZ Studio, unlike Poser, like in Poser, every body part is actually its own mesh. It's its own group. And if you're using that parametric rigging, unless you have manually welded group vertices together inside the OBJ, Poser doesn't know that those are welded. It welds them on the fly, and there's a number of reasons it does that. It used to be a very necessary thing for Poser for a lot of reasons, but there's some major differences that introduces between Poser and DAZ Studio when it comes to morphs. And not every figure has this issue, or has morphs that work quite that way inside Poser, but in the process of conversion, they always end up becoming aliases per body part in DAZ Studio, meaning if I click on the head, I have all these aliases that show up. The reason for that is DAZ Studio, when you convert that, and it's no longer looking at it as a CR2, then it's no longer looking at those individual body part groups. It's looking at the entire mesh. And all of those morphs, it basically takes the entire mesh and makes a copy, recalculates a whole morph for the entire mesh, stores all of that in what a Poser user or Poser developer might consider the body of the character. So if we double click this guy, since we're in edit mode and I have show hidden turned on, you can see there's a grayed out thing here that says morphs, and in it will say imported. Okay, that's where DAZ Studio is cataloging all the morphs that were inside the Poser version and shoving them in. And so what it does is it will have a morph for, let's say you have a full body morph. It'll have a morph for the collar area. It'll have a morph for the shoulder area. It'll have all these separate morphs that all work together through the alias. That's really clunky. And so that's one of the big things I'll show you for you brokered artists who are coming to the private seminar next week. That's one of the really, really big things. I'm going to show you ways to correct that so that you don't have excess data floating around inside your figures, and you can really make that stuff clean and work a little more smoothly, all that kind of stuff. So, and that's just one example of some of the things that are considerations when you want to convert your content into a commercially viable piece of content. So, so that's just to kind of give you an idea of some of the stuff we're going to cover next week. But for now, everything I've shown you here is great for just functionally converting your existing catalog, your existing content over for really for personal use. And I think a lot of folks will really dig that. So I hope that that has been successful in getting the point across with all that. I hope you guys have picked up some cool stuff from that. The last thing to do with that is to save it out, which again, there are some specific things to a to someone who does this professionally. Some specific ways that you would want to set up a library for that. I would actually encourage, even if you're doing it just for personal use, I would encourage you to have a library set up properly for that. So I'll show you real quickly how to do that, and then we'll wrap things up from there. So I've already done some work with converting this guy. So I will just open up my folder location for that. And here you see I have a set of folders that I've made next to my runtime. And it's kind of interesting because you can have the runtime folder, and I actually like to work this way if I'm doing a conversion. I'll have my Poser runtime folder sitting right next to the figures folder, documents folder, and data folder for what I'm converting. So for the sake of like a redistributable DAZ Studio file or DAZ Studio build of something, you only really need figures, data, and the runtime folder with the textures inside it. So like if you go inside that, you can get rid of libraries and geometries, just so you have runtime, textures, and all the stuff underneath there. What you really need, though, is make sure that you have a figures folder, and then we load in that figures folder the same way that you've seen me load in DAZ Studio content libraries before. Okay, and then once you have that, I'll go into figures, and I'll just make folders that are wherever I want to save it. There's a certain paradigm for products, a certain process to that I like to use that's kind of a commercial standard. But if you're just doing it for personal use, you don't really need to worry about that a whole lot. But once you have a directory set up that you're going to save it into for yourself, then you just go to File, Save As, Support Asset, hit Figure Prop Asset, and then that will bring up dialogues where you plug in the name, and like if you're a vendor, you plug in whatever kind of vendor name you have, all that kind of stuff. And then once that's saved, then you can reload that DAZ Studio version that you've now converted. So that's pretty much it. That's kind of, like I said, this is a very short form version of converting content. There's a lot of different types of content. Converting things that are mechanical can be a little different. There's some things that you can get into with that. Things that don't necessarily have soft deformations. You know, there's a lot of little nuances you can get into things like that. But this is a good introduction. And one of the reasons I liked this subject as something to do in a seminar was I feel like converting your existing poser content over to DS is a great way to get your feet wet in working with DS as a content producer. Or even just taking someone else's content that you already have inside Poser and using it as a converter, or using it to convert that content to DS as a means of teaching yourself more about rigging inside DAZ Studio. I'm not an old hat at DAZ Studio by any stretch of the means. I avoided DS like the plague for 10 years, maybe? I don't know. A long time. Probably longer than that. There was a lot of reasons for that. When I came to DS, one of the first things that I realized I needed to do was to figure out where my poser skills were analogous to DS and other skills like Maya and things like that. But I needed to figure out where those skills were analogous. And so one of the first things I started saying was, well, if I convert a figure over, what's that look like? How's that work? What are going to be the differences? And I kind of knew that it was in those differences that I would learn a lot about the program. So that's kind of what I've brought to you today with this, is where those differences are, or some of those differences, some of those things to consider, things like parametric rigging inside Poser versus skin weights versus general weight mapping and triax, all these sorts of things, I-ray conversion, all that stuff. So, it's a lot to think about. I know it's kind of a big subject, and I hope that in this 2 hours or so that we've been together, I've been able to sort of boil that stuff down into at least your first big bite-sized chunk. Like I said, there's a lot more you can go into, but I feel like we've covered a lot of ground in a short amount of space today in a way that hopefully makes some sense. And I fully expect you folks to do some rewatch on this, go back and kind of watch some parts and cycle through those a few times just to get some of the nuts and bolts of this really down. But hopefully I haven't missed anything, and we've really been able to touch on that subject in a way that works. I hope you guys pick up something from that. So, as is my usual process, I'm going to kind of stop, take a look at the chat, see where everybody's at, see if anyone has any questions, comments, or whatever. It's kind of cool. See, we have 22 people on here with us today, hanging out and watching. So it's nice. It's nice to see that number climb back up a little bit from the last time we did one of these. I hope that all of you who are currently producing content will be bringing that content, or at least some of it, over to CGBytes. Those of you who aren't necessarily producing content yet, I hope you see things here that encourage you to kind of take that plunge and start working on building those skills. It's fun, it's expressive, and it's a good way to bring in some extra income for yourself, or might even eventually become your primary mode of income like it is for me. So anyway, taking a look at the chat, let's see. Brent says, on the rigging, is it easier to DAZ Studioify? Yeah, it's not as smooth as poserize, is it? I always hated that term when people say, can you poserize this for me? It's like, do you think there's just a button I hit? Whatever.
So let's see. Let me scroll back up. Actually, he's running off the movie here. Gotcha. Okay. So let's see. Brent says it's easier to destudiify humanoid meshes. Actually, it has no bearing on anything whatsoever, necessarily. Organic models, creatures, animals, things like that, have their own sets of hurdles and little things that you have to do with them. Mechanical models, they all have their own little issues that you run into, and so to say is it easier? I don't know. It's hard to say. It's hard to say. You run into different problems. That's why, if you go all the way back to the beginning of this, I said I was talking a little bit about how I approach all of this as problem solving. So it's hard for me to answer a question like that because of the way I look at things. But what I will say is hopefully some of the tools I've given everyone today will give you a basis for that kind of problem solving so that you then start becoming able to piece your way through what the problems are and start coming up with solutions. And it's all a giant puzzle. And what I'm trying to do, it's like a puzzle where you can't see the pieces. And right now I'm trying to shine a light on the pieces so then you guys can start picking the pieces up and putting them together, if that makes sense. So let's take a look at the chat a little bit more and see what we have here. See, Limba Zero says, I hope Poser will do right conversion for general weight map when exporting FBX. Unfortunately, one of the reasons that I have moved so much to Dash Studio is their FBX implementation it's beautiful. And there are lots of reasons why I like using mine. I have a massive content library. And it's very rare that I have anybody else's content. I've been creating content since about 1994. And I have a huge content library. And sometimes pieces of that library get pulled into projects, commercial projects, and other areas, other industries, and but having them rigged in, having them in some kind of an already rigged format is very beneficial to me, and having a pipeline to get those into FBX is a very important thing. And I had very high hopes for Poser over the last few years that their FBX implementation would be solid. It's been passable, but compared to the FBX implementation in Poser in Daz Studio, I have to give Daz credit. They knocked it out of the park on that. They really made that something important. Whereas in Poser, there's a lot of reasons why the way they've implemented FBX there is just not that strong. And in particular, it's because, and I've said this a few times in this seminar, their skin weight implementation is just not that solid. And so there's a lot of reasons inside what we've been talking about today, actually, that relate directly to that FBX export inside Poser. I'm not a fan of it. And so trying to do a Poser to Daz Studio conversion via FBX, you might be able to get it to work sometime. I'm not holding my breath on it. If you can, great, cool, and by all means experiment with it. Experiment with everything. Experimentation is great. My personal expectation on that is that it ain't gonna happen. This is not gonna work well. So I hate to say that, but just being truthful. Take a look back over here again. Let's see. Oh, and Limba, your next point. I need to figure out how to do game ready hairs. When you mentioned game ready, I've actually done a lot of work for the Unity engine and for UDK, and if I don't want to get into that stuff too much right now, but if there is a call for some instructional material related specifically to game engines and game-related types of work, be sure to let the folks at CGBytes know that you'd be interested in that kind of thing, because if that's a really cool area. That's something that I really enjoy, but most of my interaction like this is in the form of Poser and Daz Studio, so it's not something that I really think a whole lot about, doing instructional type stuff on. But if there's call for it, then maybe something can happen there sometime. So I definitely could help you out with that, though. So let's see what else we have. Lobo, question. You're on scale issue when modeling for Daz, just curious. Well, there's an interesting thing about Daz Studio. They have built in their importer, like if we go to import an existing object, and let me grab something. Let me just find something floating around in all my junk. Let's see, bits box. Oh, let's grab something. Here, I'll grab this Rancor. Okay, so the dialogue for that, when this comes up inside Daz Studio, you have all kinds of presets for different scale factors, which I find incredibly handy. So like that guy was already built for Poser, so I could click on that, and he should come in at the proper scale. So there's that figure's actual scale, that OBJ scale. So that's the first place I would look at. Now, if you have a program that's not on that list, the thing is, odds are there's something in that list that does conform to the same scale factor that the program you're using uses. So it may take some experimentation, but I would encourage you to go through that, and then when you find that scale factor, just remember it, or maybe even just remember that, or make a note of it somewhere, and you should be good. Linda says, I use FBX for Unity. Yep. Yes, that would be the thing to do. All right. Well, that looks, let's see. Oh, question. Oh, one more question here. And I think after this one, I'm going to bring things to a close. On iRay Uber, those are 3D light materials. I noticed that white-colored material becomes extremely bright. Yes, it does. There's a very high dynamic range, kind of like HDRI. It's what HDR, high dynamic range imagery. Well, iRay is an HDRI based or HDRI friendly render engine. Its materials have this massive dynamic range, which means if you notice on this guy's materials, I backed it down from being pure white underneath the texture map, and it looked better. And the reason it looked better is because that pure white that's in there is inside a very large dynamic range. And our eye, like the range that covers numerically is actually larger than what your eyes can even see. So if you have that pushed up to pure white, it's actually blasting so much white, or not even so much white, but there's so much light coming back from that surface that it can make things washed out or whatever. So it's a good idea to kind of clamp for yourself that range down by bringing that down from 100% white to maybe 80. Somewhere between 80 and 90% from what I've seen tends to be the sweet spot for not blowing out your textures. I'm not quite following your, see Colonel Sanders there, I'm not quite following your question, but I'm trying to interpret the best I can. So is there areas you think best to check Well, that's some of the stuff that I was covering actually with my work in Iray and in the surfaces here. Was going into things like, if I'm answering your question correctly, if I'm reading it correctly, where I went into here and just dropped those values down and all that, and that's kind of a one of those kind of in the eye of the beholder sort of things too. There's a lot of things about Iray and about editing materials in any program that really comes down a lot to personal preferences, personal taste, and so you want to play around with stuff. I know it's probably not the answer people would like, but like a lot of times people want an answer. It's going to be like, yes, do this, go here. But a lot of this stuff isn't like that. It takes some experimentation. You have to kind of get mad scientist on it and play around a little bit and just kind of explore. So I hope that helps a little bit. And watch back through the video, I think, and you'll see where I was editing stuff before. You might see some things there that'll help. So I'm going to bring this to a close. I want to thank everybody for coming out today. I hope you enjoyed the figure that we're sharing. So this is an existing piece out of the 6S1 catalog that I brought over to CGBytes to share with you guys. I hope you guys will take some time and take the Poser version of this. Even if you don't have Poser, by the way, you can unzip it and load that runtime in and follow right along with everything I've shown you in the video today. And I hope that you'll do that and kind of explore that and explore some of the things that I was showing you about figure conversions, because that all relates directly to content development, figure rigging. It all goes together, and this is a great, great place to start from if you're just curious even. So anyway, I want to thank Jason, Loki, and Terry, all the folks from CGBytes for hosting these things and putting this together and having me around to give me a platform through which to kind of reach out to you guys and help folks maybe pick up some tips and tricks. Really been pleased over the last few months as I've been doing these with the artwork that I'm seeing coming out from people, the content that's coming to CGBytes, all this cool stuff. It's really, really neat for me to see my experience relayed to you guys, and then what you guys all do with it, with what I can show you, and seeing you guys start to step up and build your own content, make new artwork, do all this kind of cool stuff. That's a cool thing for me. I dig that. I really dig that. I'm very blessed to be able to bring that to you guys, and really appreciate everything that goes into us being able to do this. So I want to thank you all for being here, and again, hope you dig the figure. And if you're not already a brokered artist at CGBytes, I highly, highly encourage you to go back through the videos on our channel. Remember, like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Go back through those videos. Watch them. I know some of them get really, really long. But if there's a subject that you would like to have covered, or you have a question that seems like it should be covered in one, and it's just so long that you're having trouble finding it in the course of the video, pop a question in the comments. I will probably be able to answer it pretty quickly, and might even know where to take you to and like tell you, oh, go here inside the video. So, but be sure, use this channel to interact with us, to interact with me, ask me questions and all that kind of stuff. I want this to be sort of an open forum where we have a conversation about this stuff as I'm teaching it. Don't hesitate to go back through and watch those videos, watch those past seminars, follow along with things. And if you are not already a CGBytes brokered artist, if you're not already a CGBytes brokered artist, then take some time to go look through that stuff. If that's something you might have an interest in, and I would imagine since you're here you might, watch through that stuff. And even if it's just doing a simple pose kit, or there are some of the earlier seminars where I actually show you start to finish in the course of the seminar how you could make a given thing. A lot of that requires Zbrush, so if you don't have Zbrush, you can go to the ones about posing, and there's stuff there that can take you through how to make a product that's just imposes it. You don't even have to buy anything. You can use Daz Studio right there to do that. So, but I would encourage you, go through and look at that stuff, pick something out, try to make something, try to make a product. You know, reach out to Terry at CGBytes. She manages that end of things, and she'll get you hooked up as a vendor, with the vendor kit, and you can become a CGBytes brokered artist and have access to the exclusive brokered artist seminars that we do on the off weeks from these public shows. Because, man, those are fun. We do those through Google Hangout, and they're a hoot. First off, they're fun because you get everybody, well, not everybody, like the first 10 people who show up can actually be on screen with me. We can share screens back and forth. You can see each other's faces, and it's just it's a good time. Honestly, it's fun. It's actually a lot of fun. Just the format that provides. But then also, if you're one of those first 10 there, you'll be able to screen share back to me, and then so you could show me, you could be following along with something and say, I'm just not getting it. I'm just not following along with you. Can you show me what's going on? Then you can show me your screen, and I can tell you, okay, I see your screen. Go here, click this. Go here, do this. And I can give you very granular, directed, in-person help. But to get that, you need to be a CGBytes brokered artist. You need to come on board. So to get there, though, we've already given you the tools to do that. Given you a lot of tools to do that, and I really want to see more of you guys go back, watch those videos, pick up some of that stuff, and give it a shot. You know, there's nothing wrong with trying. You know, the old saying goes, nothing ventured, nothing gained, and there's a whole lot to be gained when you're on board with that. So, and that's kind of why I'm here. Just as a personal note, you know, I see this as an opportunity to better some people's lives. And it's, I know that sounds kind of grand and may seem almost silly, but it's true. I have the opportunity to take something that I've been passionate about for 20-some years and have learned a lot about in these years. I have the opportunity to take that and distill it down for you guys and show you some things and offer you a set of tools that can maybe make you a little extra money, maybe become the start of a career, but can make your life better. Even if it makes your life better just in that you can now do things with artwork that you didn't think about before. It's so cool to me that I get to help improve part of your life somewhere with that. I think that's just crazy cool. It blows my mind how awesome that is. And there are some really big ways that what we do here can have an effect and can help you with some really cool stuff and bring some improvements into your world. Just go back and watch some of the videos and look at some of the tools and things that we're giving you in terms of what I'm teaching, and put that stuff into effect. You know, I've talked a lot about ways to take that step into becoming a brokered artist, making an income with this stuff. And it is totally possible to make a very, very nice income doing that. CGBytes, man, the folks there are super cool, super nice, very interested in helping you succeed and do that. So anyway, you know, that's my hope. That's my hope, is that these out of these public seminars, you know, those of you who maybe are on the fence or you're testing the water or curious, jump in. Jump in with both feet. Go grab some of those videos, look at some of the tools and tips and tricks and things I'm giving you. Follow up on that stuff. Look at some of them where I've actually talked about the path to becoming a brokered artist and the way that you can do that. Follow up on that. Reach out to me. I'm glad to help. And then reach out to the folks at CGBytes. Come be part of our little cool kids club on the off weeks where you can hang out, be on screen with us, show us your work, show me your work, get some hands-on help, and get to know some people and kind of grow with us in some really cool ways. So that is going to wrap it up for today. I want to thank you guys again for being here. It's been a lot of fun, and to those folks who are brokered artists, I'll see you guys next week.